Hi. Hi, Julian.
Hi.
I miss you. My
miss
dogs
you
have a
too.
special fondness for Julian's ankles. So cat's out of the bag.
Spitting it all out there.
Look, I have nothing left to lose, my friend. So
Yeah, I mean, you don't.
So we're going to talk tonight about representation in literature, particularly LGBTQIA plus representation, but full representation by POC. Something that's kind of close to my heart is disability rep. So we're just going to sort of talk together about a lot of different kinds of representation. Does that sound right to you, Julia? I didn't mean to jump in and make the intro, but
no, you're good. I'm terrible at those things you're talking about.
So I thought maybe we can just start out by talking about what makes good representation. Do you want to say first so I can copy off you?
Listen, I'm not going to tell you what my GPA is when I graduated, so you might not want to copy off of me. I think what makes great representation or good representation is...
Let's go with great.
now you're up in the level of what I got to reach here. I think it's really about being mindful of your surrounding and the world, the ever-changing world that we exist in, not to just, when you're writing or being creative, not to just think inside of your own bubble, and think widely. What do we see and what do we not see when it comes to representation, and how can we make it more visible, and how can we make sure that it is sensitive and it is authentic and it is real, and not stereotypical and cliched and or watered down, or a caricature of what we think should be out there. I think those are the things that you have to be mindful of. I think what makes great representation is normalizing things. Stop making it stop making people these anomalies. Oh my gosh, you mean to tell me there's a queer person that lives in this, in this world? Or, oh my goodness, there's a person of color, or, a neurodivergent person, or someone with a disability. All these
don't even
things.
Think about having two of those things or more in one character. You gotta have the one of each.
Exactly. And then you gotta be careful with having too many of the references. It's oh my gosh. But I think those are super important to think about when being creative, when writing, when trying to tell stories. That's what makes great representation to me. But what about for you?
I mean, I'm just turned 50 this year, friends. So I'm old enough to remember when there was nothing out there. And I wasn't kidding in my bio when I said a miserable queer teen. I was gay, but I didn't know anybody else that was queer. Family, friends, schoolmates, nobody. And kids at school were not out at that point because it was dangerous. And also I was in Ohio, so it was really dangerous. But yeah, it was miserable time. And books didn't even represent girls, really. The books I read as a kid were like Encyclopedia Brown, which is about a boy. He's a smart boy, so I had to take it where I could get it. The smart white boy was the guy who was going to represent the queer, half immigrant girl. And that was the best I could do. And so I think representation is good representation when it's real. In other words, I knew I existed. I knew other kids whose parents were immigrants. I knew other kids who are now out as queer. I knew other kids who were girls. And it didn't have to be a special thing. It seemed like authors actually did gymnastics to feature a certain kind of person that wasn't me, that was straight and white and male and middle class and American. Those people got featured at the expense of reality. If you're being real, people are going to come in. Right. And I would say if you are trying to represent something that is not you, you should ask yourself why. If you don't know anybody who's queer, why are you representing a queer person? If you don't know anybody who's female, first of all, where do you live? But second of all, you know, why are you doing that? It seems to me like that it has to grow from the world that you really live in, and really see, and the people you really interact with, who are either you or your family or your friends. That good representation is not about representation at all, but just about mimesis almost, right? Like mimicking reality, like just reproducing what's real, even if those characters are in a spaceship. There has to be something rooted in experience. The end. So I was thinking a lot because I got some pushback on my last book, which had on Olympia Knife, and also on this one a little bit, because it has characters who are definitely not like me. I'm half Greek and half American mutt. I'm a queer girl, but I'm cis. And I wrote about characters who were, I'm immigrant. I'm sorry, I'm first gen. I'm the child of an immigrant, but that immigrant identified, he was Greek and identified himself as white. And that became sort of a sticking point for writing about characters that were not like me, characters who were East Indian, for instance, or characters who were trans. And I have many friends who are trans. My partner is trans, but it's not me. I'm not writing from my own experience. And that becomes a little dicey for a lot of people when you're writing about people who aren't you. But I feel like if you're only writing about people who are exactly like you, you're going to have a very boring book. And I've said this a number of times. Nobody wants to read about fat 50-year-old cis lesbians living in New York, you know, or maybe one book, and then that's kind of it. So I feel like that kind of representation, it's part of what writers do, right? We have to cast out, but it has to be really responsible and real. I feel like your characters are, even though they're not like you at all, Julian.
Thank you. At all. At all. You will not see my emotional messy side on the page. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting place to be when writing and when trying to flesh out characters and make them whole, but also make them not exactly you. Because like you said, I could only write, I mean, I'm trying really hard to write like 7 books with a comic book geek as the lead, but you can only tell a certain story so many times. And I think the stickiness comes in back to what you said during the first question, which is, if you're writing about a character outside of your own identity, first question is why? And how are you telling that story? I think when you decide as a writer that you're going to tell it in first person, we might need to back it up a bit. We might need to, you know, really dive a little bit deeper into that first question of why you're doing it. When you're doing it, kind of like how you've done, especially like Luck Monkey, and how I've done like the Summer of Everything, where we're telling it third person, where we're not centering ourselves in this narrative in a certain way. I think that kind of representation is important. It's great to have, but when you're telling a first person, like, I can't tell, you know, your story. I can't. I am a Black gay man, I'm cisgendered. I am able-bodied. There's so many different parts of my identity that I could not tell if I was trying to tell your story. And I think that's an important thing to think about when writing is: am I trying to tell this identity or identities or community story, or am I just trying to make sure that they are represented in a positive, affirming, visible light? And that's I think that's the one of the bigger differences that people don't think about when writing. I mean, that's when it becomes harmful, and that's when it becomes dangerous, and that's when it becomes just all around bad, just bad. Because I don't care how much you Google, you know, certain parts of identities and communities and whatnot. Google and BuzzFeed and Reddit and all these other different places are not going to give you the information of what it's like to exist in that body, in the surroundings that they are in. And so, again, it just goes back to what kind of narrative you're trying to tell and how you're trying to tell it. And that's, for me, one of the bigger issues that people don't look at. And they just look at, well, I just want to make sure that, these people get, represented because I don't see them in other books. Well, I'm pretty sure the people from that community, one, are trying to write the book, and publishing does not open many doors for them to be able to get in and tell their story. And two, I'm pretty sure that they are good without you trying to tell their story. We appreciate you noticing us. Thank you so much for your donation. But also, don't try to tell our story. Make sure that we are a part of the world, but don't feel like you're the one who has to drive, the vehicle, that we're in.
That's an excellent point. I always think about, I can't remember if it came from Spike Lee's profile of Malcolm X or something else I knew of Malcolm X, or maybe it wasn't even Malcolm X. I can't remember. So don't hold me to any of that. But somebody was talking about I think there was like a white woman who came to Malcolm X and said, how can I help? I want to help. How can I help? And he said, you can't. You have to just stand back and let us do. And I think that's an important thing for empowered people to hear, is that it's not your job, but there are ways to help. And I think the distinction is, like, you don't have to stand on the platform and talk. You don't have to be the one speaking. You can build the platform.
Yes.
You can get the crowd there to listen. You can, I don't know, sell popcorn in the crowd, whatever. Like you can facilitate the speaking rather than being the one who's up front. There's lots of work that has to be done behind the scenes. And so promoting or lifting up other people seems to be the right thing. Like, you can't tell my story, I can't tell your story, but we can promote each other. We can make sure that I can make sure that you don't need me, but you can have a platform. I can make sure you have a platform to speak, right? You can help me have a platform to speak. So it doesn't have to be, the only way to take responsibility is not to be the one out front. There's lots and lots of ways to take responsibility by lifting other people up. It doesn't have to be that sort of like cliche masculinist in charge, taking over thing in order to make a difference. There's plenty of ways to help. I learned that by being a girl, frankly. I was trained into that because I grew up in the 70s, and that's how we were trained, right? Is like to help other people. But I think that's actually, there's something really important about that.
No, I definitely agree that, like you said, it's not your job to take the mic, but it is on all of us to, I always think about like opening doors. Like, if you get in the door, you hold it open for the person coming in behind you. Don't just let it slam shut. No, I'm on my way, sit down.
You're from Georgia. I'm from New York.
Yes. The Southern hospitality is very, even in a pandemic, we're all just like, here, let me put my hands all on this handlebar that you have to touch next and hold the door for you. Yes, that's just how it is. But I mean, it's such a real thing, and it's definitely a metaphor. I think when I think about writing, when I think about activism, anything, it's if I get in, I need to hold the door open for the next person, for the next 12 people, and make sure that they're getting in and saying what they need to say. I don't need to go up to and say what they need to say. They need to say it, but I do need to do my due diligence and hold that door open and make sure that they have room and make sure they have a seat at the table. And then from there, then they can build and build and build, and it's just like pay it forward kind of system, but also it's this community that we're building together and bridging gaps that, like you said, back in the day, we just did not have.
We didn't. It's a much better day now than it was in 1975. Yeah. Do you remember 1975? Are you old enough?
I was not here for 75.
Okay, then zip it. What else was I thinking about? I'm going to look at my list because, oh, I know what it was. I was thinking, we talked about this before, about how and I think this sort of this is a little bit of an offshoot of what we were just talking about, but how we keep it sounding, hopefully one keeps it sounding like natural and normal, and not self-conscious when you are attempting to consciously you're attempting to bring people into the story. I hesitate to use the word represent, but like, you know what I mean? Like the bad thing is that one of each thing, like, oh, I need a this character and I need a that character.
Yes. Oh, the checklist vibes. I cannot deal
It's
with.
gross, right?
So, oh my goodness. It's so, I gotta make sure that I have the Black person, and then I have the queer person, and I have the Latinx person, and I have the Asian person. It's like, is that really how you see how this world is built? That we have checklists of making sure that each, community is represented, and then
the one of each. One of each.
Exactly.
Well, and God forbid any of them is more than one thing. Like
Right.
You've got your Black person, you've got your gay person. You're not going to have a Black gay person. That is just a bridge too far. That's part of why I like the word queer instead of, and this is controversial, I understand, like it's an age thing in part. People older than me don't like the word queer.
Right.
Not that old. But there has been a lot of attempts to sort of revivify the LGBTQ label, which when I was young was gay, and then was like LG, and then moved up to like LGB, and then it got a T. Like they just kept trying to add people to the coalition because they were realizing that it was like wiping people out and erasing identities. And so the solution was to just add more letters. So now we have a ton of letters. I kind of like the word queer simply because it includes all of that without trying to parse down and like add those letters.
Right. And it also it also eliminates the thought process that we can't be multiple identities, that we can't fit under this umbrella and be more than just one thing. All of a sudden then we're boxed into I have to represent this one letter when yesterday I don't know if I was that letter, or tomorrow might not be this letter. And I think reclaiming the word queer, I know it has its own connotation for people who struggle with it in the ways it was used in the past. And I think it's so important to reclaim that power and to, use it in a positive light, or use it to empower us to recognize that our community is huge. It is no longer this minuscule thing that only certain people fit under. It encompasses so many people. And to have that one word, I think like you said, it's important to show people that, hey, we all exist under this umbrella, and we can break it down most definitely and how you identify and whatnot, but it's also like, but you don't have to. You don't have to go in this and say, okay, and this is where I fit in here. You just be queer, and that's it.
And it seems like the danger there is erasure again, right?
Yes.
That queer doesn't, like everybody has in their minds what queer means. And for someone my age, we had the game Smear the Queer. So it's basically gay boys, maybe a lesbian or two tossed in there, and that's about it. What queer conjures for people, but other people think differently about it. So queer has this ability not only to lift all boats, but like to cover them over completely so we don't see them. And like in darn it, I'm forgetting the name of the book. Maybe it's How to Be Remy Cameron. You have an ace character. Which book is
The Summer of Everything.
Summer of Everything. Thank you. Sorry about that. No, you're just dealing with a baddie person who doesn't have a memory.
You're dealing with an author who doesn't remember what he wrote, so you're good.
Well, good. Okay, then. So you wrote this one book that involved aliens, and a merry-go-round and two elephants. Do you remember that one?
It sounds like something I saw on Showtime.
P.S. Somebody please write that book now, or at least a short story. I would read it. But what was I saying? I don't even know. I distracted myself. Oh, so you have this character who's ace, who would get covered over if one talked about him as queer. He has to be articulated as ace for us to really see him, right? And he's not the stereotype of what one often thinks of as ace.
Right. Yeah.
Like he's
just, as someone who grew up watching these stereotypes on TV and in movies, I just refuse to, it's almost like my own personal hill that I am on and battling for, which is identity does not it doesn't dictate who we are, how we act, the things that we like and whatnot. It's a part of who we are. And so, yeah, Cooper and the Summer of Everything, I was just like, if I want great representation, I want it there for readers who need it, then I have to just totally take out what I've had to consume myself as this poor representation and think about each of these people. They're human. That's what they are. And that humanity needs to be shown through action and through words and whatnot. So yeah, he's definitely not falling into that stereotype or character of what I've seen the media do to people on the A spectrum, what I've seen people do with a lot of queer identities.
Yeah, and I was thinking as I started asking you that question, I was like thinking about something else, but now I'm interested to talk to you about that kind of general representation. First of all, it seems to me like it goes back to what you were saying before about you said something about representation being a different thing from just having the characters in there and being sort of real, right? And I don't remember the word you used. If somebody else has a better memory than me, please.
I don't remember the word I used either.
Okay, good. Julian, I love you so much. But you make me feel so good about myself. Listen, and my bad memory, because I feel like we're in the same boat.
We are, definitely.
But I think, it's like this, you're not representing an ace character there. I don't think that's a representation. Right. I think that is a character who's there, who is ace, but is also a total nerd, who is also kind of annoying, who is also X and Y and Z and all this other stuff.
Right.
It reminded me of Sarah Jessica Parker's character in LA Story, but nobody probably knows that. I'm just a Steve Martin fan, but that's sort of like, like kind of twee tipping around, kind of crazy person. But he's a very real and actualized person, and that's simply a part of his identity. He's not there to represent that. And right. It seems like the difference is he's being shown as an individual, and that identity is part of his individual identity, as opposed to him being a representative of a group, which is the thing we all have a problem with, right? Like, I don't want to have to represent all women or all queers or all disabled people when I talk about my own experience. And there's something that has, I don't want to call it a fad, but there is a practice that has sprung up in recent years of having people read your book before you put it out in the world, to give it over a read. They're called sensitivity readers, and they read your book with an eye toward the way certain people are represented. So you may have a sensitivity reader who's reading, who is themselves, and it's always someone reading for their own identity, who is themselves Black, who's reading for how the Black characters are represented, right?
Right.
And it seems to me, first of all, if you need that, you're already in trouble. If you need to go find somebody, but I still think it's a really good practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I don't think necessarily it's that you're in trouble if you need an authenticity reader or sensitivity reader. I think it's part of the process of you making sure that your representation is not harmful. And I think that's super important. I think that's something you should think about. I do think if you need it for a character that you wrote in their identity, then of course we've reached that point. But I've used authenticity readers for 3 out of 4 of my books, including the book that's coming out next year. I've used them because I do write identities that are not me. And even if it's a small part, I still am so cautious in making sure that I am not writing to a stereotype. I am not writing something harmful. I am not writing something that could do more damage than it's going to do good. And so I think that's super important. I love it. I think it for me, I use them quite often because I am writing young adult. I am writing for teens, and they are at that stage where if I write something harmful, that does lasting damage. Versus as me and you as adults, we've already made up our mind on everything from how people are going to be in certain situations to the way that we like our pies made. That's just in us. And I think
we'll have to talk about the pie thing.
We probably will. So I think it's super important. I do think it is something, like you said, it is been around. It may have been around for a while. I don't know what the term was before, but it is something that is more prevalent in literature. Especially, like I said, in children's literature. I'm not sure about the adult side. I have yet to write an adult novel. I know I do authenticity reads. I have done them for other adult novels, but I just don't know how much it's used compared to on the children's side, where we use it frequently, because again, you don't want to do harm.
Makes a lot of sense. I have talked to numerous people who've used sensitivity readers, and I really do prefer the term authenticity reader. I like that.
Yeah, because
so I'm going to switch to that. But
yes.
I've talked to people. I use them myself. I have used folks myself, although they are usually people I know. And I think that's what I mean by you're in trouble. Like, if you're turning to professional sensitivity readers, because you don't know anybody who could speak to the way you're representing a character, you might need to reconsider what you're doing. I guess that's all I mean by that. But yeah, I've used them too. And I used to be sort of hard and fast against that idea for exactly that reason, that, you should know, it's your responsibility to know. But at the same time, it's also your responsibility to make sure you know, not
right.
to assume you know.
Right. I do. I mean, I see you saying, which is, if you're writing these identities, and again, you don't have any real world experience with these people, it goes way back to the first question again, which is, well, why? I'm sure they exist in your community. I'm sure if you go to the Starbucks, you'll see them. So it's a question of why am I telling this story? Why am I featuring these people? If I'm doing it just to hit that checklist, then yes, we're in danger. Molly, we in danger, girl.
What is that from?
Ghost. I love Whoopi Goldberg.
That was Whoopi Goldberg.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's the only reason to watch that movie.
Pretty much.
So, but when you have an agenda, like when you are trying to, and let's avoid the term represent, because I really do think that's problematic. But when you're trying to be inclusive, when you're consciously trying to bring people into your fiction that are not you. So let's say you have an agenda in that you are trying very consciously to do this. How do you do it naturally? And I'm asking you because I don't know.
How do you do it naturally? This is a great question. It's a great question only because I recognize my privilege. And that is, I went to a high school that was very diverse and inclusive. Well, inclusive to a degree. I worked in a current establishment that is very, diverse and whatnot. So I recognize the privilege I have in that these are people I'm around all the time, and our conversations are natural and they flow that way. And so I'm able to take that experience and put it into literature. I can't say that's the same for everyone, and especially for younger people who are trying to write, but they have no control over the environment that they're in, the setting they're in. They don't have that power to move over here or go over here and do these different things, and that I completely understand. So for me, it's natural because this is what I exist in. I put myself into those situations. I won't say I'm a complete extrovert, but I will talk to you in the grocery line, at Publix or something like that. The conversation will happen, just because
I'm just say you're not a complete extrovert.
Oh my goodness, no. If you only knew the times where I put on a show to be, to talk to people, when really I just wanted to hide in my shell and just go back to my room and not speak to anyone and read a book. I am not a complete extrovert. but I can be. I've taught myself how to be, I guess. And so for me, that is natural when I'm writing and whatnot, because these are just people that I'm around all the time. They exist in my world. Like I said, I know that's not the same for everyone, but you sure got to try to make sure in some way, shape, or form that is the world that surrounds you. So it does feel natural. So it doesn't come down to like you said, an agenda where I'm like, okay, and all right, I've got this character and they represent these things, or this is their identity. I think it's dangerous when you get into that habit of making checklists and making, agendas and notes on, who has to do what, or who has to represent what in order for you to tell your stories.
I was talking before about what it was like to grow up in the 70s and have nada, in terms of represent, like what we had was like Jim J. Bullock, on that show with the guy with the moose puppet, and he was like effusive, and we were supposed to understand that he was gay, and he was like the biggest stereotype you could ever see. Not that there aren't people like that, certainly, right, but that was the only representation we ever got on TV.
Right.
And I think back to that, and I think back to like all of the texts that I encountered coming up. And many of us did that sort of resistant reading of texts where we gayed it, like we made it gay. Like, oh, I think the sisters are having an affair. Every single line, yes. It was like the best activity for a very long time. Books, TV didn't matter. And I know that still goes on. Yeah, actually, definitely. Like in fan fiction, a lot of people write little, pairings that aren't shown in the show.
Yeah, that aren't made canon, but you make what you make.
Oh, okay, the words. Okay, yeah, they're not canon. Okay,
I spent a great deal of my time. I mean, that's where we find a lot of times most of our representation is in fanfic. So that's where we get to write it in ourselves. So I spent a lot of time in fanfic world.
Well, that's sort of what I was thinking about, is like, now it seemed to me, look, so in Summer of Everything, there is, when I was first reading it, I said to my wife, I was like, this reminds me so much of Empire Records, that movie Empire Records. And then I got to the thing and there was like a shout out. It was like, direct, like, I'm doing this. This is like Empire Records, but it's a bookstore. But they sure do talk a lot about music in that, that bookstore. They're much cooler than the bookstore I worked at. Yeah, but it started me wondering, when you were doing it, did you consciously rewrite a straight text, like queer it? Is that
and make sure there's people of color there? No,
you will that too. Yes, the white text, and put some people of color in.
No, I didn't. I did not go in trying to make it like an Empire Records thing for two reasons. One, love the movie. Still get so many laughs out of it. Soundtrack is banging. But
Brendan Sexton III is the best person in the world in that. But anyway, go on.
Yes, exactly. But I didn't go in trying to like recreate it, just because I have a lot of issues with the media, like you said, with media and movies and stuff that I had growing up. I have a lot of issues. I've tried so hard to go back and watch so many movies and TV shows that I grew up watching, thinking this is the best thing ever, and now watching it now, as an adult who was like, who was awake to what should be happening, and saying, oh my gosh, I was supporting so much problematic stuff. I mean, like, this is terrible. So no, I did not go in trying to recreate Empire Records, but I did recognize that movies like that, that fun, joyful, lighthearted stuff needs to exist for marginalized identities. And so in that way, I did say, okay, well, I need to write something fun and funny and memorable. But also was like, I'm not doing the play-by-play of this movie. just because it's going to be so much different, especially since I'm telling the story through a Black queer character, and his experience moving in the world and navigating things is going to be totally different from like Ethan Embry and Liv Tyler and all those wonderful people in that movie. Like it's going to be way different. Like his issues are going to be so much deeper than whether he's gotten into a college or whether the best friend he has a crush on likes him back, kind of thing. So no, that was not my intention. To make long answer short, not my intention at all. But I did have to recognize the shout out because I did steal that one little bit about when they veto music. I was like, yeah.
Oh. No, I'm thinking not that you were trying to reproduce it faithfully, but that you were taking a second chance at it. Kind of like now as a 50-year-old, I wish I could go back to high school to my prom with my wife. Instead of the schmucky boy I wound up having to go with who wore a white tuxedo.
Oh my God.
Yes. And I'll just have you know, I wore a bubblegum pink dress that I made myself that had a big bubble skirt, and it was taffeta because it was 1988, 87.
Is very much Pretty in Pink vibes. I love it.
Oh, it was so disgusting. It was awful. But that's why I'm thinking, like, I wish I could go back and just be the queer ball that I am now with my wife and just go in and just be like, you know, I don't, excuse my fingers. I don't like any of you. You know, you're too small and stupid and I don't want to be here, but I will just to tell you this, you know, and it almost feels at points like, what you were doing in Summer of Everything specifically, but sometimes like Running with Lions also, like it's a second chance.
Yeah. Like that's all of my books is me taking something I didn't have or didn't get growing up. And like I said, second chancing it, you know, recreating that happy ending versus the ending that actually happened, kind of thing. I always do that. I think that's so important because people need that. They need to see that they can get that. And I don't want to say I wasn't brave enough. I was not in the mindset to go after the things that might happen in my books. But I also recognize that my generation, your generation, is not half as brave and like bold as the current generation. So showing them that hell yes, you can do this is super important. So yes, it's very much a second chance for me, but also a first chance for them to do the things that they want to do in their heart.
I think that's a good point about generations too. And I'm going to nerd out for just 1 second. So warning, like plug your ears if you can't stand it. But this is from my professor days. So I used to teach about this French theorist called Luce Irigaray. And she talked about that we all have something called the imaginary, which is this spot in your head. It's this thing that you hold in your head that holds every possibility under the sun. If it is not in your imaginary, you cannot imagine it as possible. So like walking on the ceiling, right, could be in my imaginary, and then I can imagine it happening somehow. But if it's not in my imaginary, as it like, the example I always give is like, okay, imagine a sixth sense. You got that? Now imagine a seventh. Now imagine an eighth sense. You can't even, most people, whoa, mind blown. Most people can't even imagine an eighth sense because it's not in your imaginary as a possibility. So if you don't have something in your imaginary, even as a possibility to exist, it's very, very hard to imagine it. So what you're talking about, you know, the representation, which I don't want to use that word, but like the presence, okay? What you're talking about is like allowing that into people's imaginary. We didn't have that in our imaginary as kids. When I was a kid, I did not have queer women in my imaginary, except in porn magazines. That was the only way they existed, was performing for the men who read them. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, it didn't even occur to me that anybody else might be reading it but men. But that was the limitation of my imaginary. That's all I had. And what you're talking about is like expanding. You're putting more stuff in the imaginary so that people can draw from it and make it real.
Yeah, and I think part of that goes back to expanding imaginary, because of media and past literature, has done so well at shrinking it for us and making us feel as if this is the most that you can get out of it. 5 senses where we stop right here, right now. And I think it's all about showing people that no, it's so much bigger than that. And to let yourself dream big is super important, especially for people in marginalized communities. When, like we said, either we were stereotypes on TV or in books or movies, or we had to go through traumatic events to get to our happy ending, if we got that, or we were killed. And so trying to expand the imagination past that is so important, especially since if you turn on the news, again, as marginalized communities, we are represented in those 3 categories most often than we are with success stories and accomplishments and things like that. So yeah, I think it's an important part of your tool set, but I also think it's something you should feel a little bit obligated to do as a writer, which is to expand the imagination instead of trying to keep it confined to what limitation. Like, we're out here, doing the Matrix with our books. I don't know, like, pick which pill you're gonna get, but also remember that, we're telling you that the world is so much bigger than what you're living in.
And you're really hooked up to a machine.
Yeah, I mean, really.
I mean, actually, we are. So, I want to talk about favorite books. Do you have book recommendations? I have book recommendations. Do you have book recommendations?
I'm gonna need you to go first, because just a little behind the scenes, I knew this question was coming and still didn't prepare for it. So you go first.
You want to skip that? We don't have to talk about it. Okay.
No, because
and I should clarify, because I think if I can speak for you, I think I know what the problem is, which is whenever anyone asks me that, I always go, because there's about 90,000. It's not that I can't think of one. It's that I think of too many and I'm like, which ones am I going to talk about?
Exactly.
So I just want to give you your props that it's not that Julian doesn't read.
That's definitely not it.
You can read, right?
I to make up for all the reading I didn't do when I was younger because of poor representation, I read a lot now. So you go first.
Okay. I have 2 in mind that I want to suggest to people. These are adult books. These are not YA, but they are definitely readable by anyone. They're not like sex books or something, I don't know, but they're definitely like accessible to anyone with a high school reading or above, or junior high reading level and above. And one is by Rahul Mehta, Mehta. Rahul is his first name, and it's called No Other World, and it is such a beautiful novel. I love this thing so much. It might be my favorite book that I read this year, not you included. And the other book I would give a good recommendation about is by Jennifer Finney Boylan. And it is who many people know because she was on Caitlyn Jenner's little roundtable snippy trans women sniping at each other talk show thing. I don't know. I never saw that. I didn't know. I knew her as a writer and a scholar. I felt like such a nerd when I found out that's what she was famous for. But
oh no.
She has a number of autobiographies, which are great, but she wrote a book of fiction called Long Black Veil. And if you Google it, be careful, because there's a Johnny Cash song called Long Black Veil, so that's going to come up. So like look it up on a book site. But Long Black Veil is like a kind of a mystery almost, and it's about this woman who goes back and meets up with friends she had as a young person when she was a boy, and they don't know that it's her. Like, she doesn't talk about this transitioning that she's done, and it's there's like murder that happens, or like somebody disappears. It's crazy town. I love this book. It is so weird, and it hits the sweet spot for me that I tend to write in too, which I love, which is magical realism, but like queer magic realism, which is a new thing now. Like, a lot of queers are writing magic realism, like, yay. And that's definitely like my sweet spot. That's where I go. And that's where this goes too. And I love it. The end. Now it's you. Now you go.
Oh, I can't even reach the books. I will just, I mean, I'll just throw some out. This is probably one of my favorite books. Where's my camera? Favorite books ever. Darius the Great is Not Okay by Deep Karam. It is simply amazing. Representation is unbelievable. It is relatable and universal on so many levels. And plus, I'm a total nerd, and Darius is a total nerd. So that works for me. Another book is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. If you have not read that book, it is such a perfect rom-com book about a Black girl living in Indiana who is trying to make her way out of her small town by winning.
Of course she is.
Indiana. I love you, Indiana. But she's trying to make her way out, and the only way to make her way out of the small town is to, and she's a total introvert, win the prom queen crown, because it comes with a scholarship because there's such a big prom town or whatever. And it's so beautiful, so wonderful. Oh gosh, Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. Magical fantasy with a trans Latinx main character. Beautiful, wonderful, hilarious, so swoony. Y'all love a good swoon. I love a good feels.
Tell
Charming
from
as
your
a
writing that you love a good swoon.
listen, when you get the little butterflies moving around that stomach. And I also really love Charming as a Bird by Ben Philippe. It is such a funny book. I love a good voicey book too, where it's just like you can just automatically like, oh, I know you. So it's a really great book, especially dealing with college and expectations. And he is a first gen Haitian American Black kid growing up in New York City and what that's like. And it's just a really great book, but it's so funny. And I'll just stop there, but
yeah, I was gonna cut you off because you're doing the thing that,
because I feel it.
it's a problem, man. It's a problem. It's like telling a mother or a father of 3 kids to pick one that's the better one.
Yeah, I think
My mother would have picked me.
Especially coming from us, where people would ask you, okay, when we were like younger, it's like, well, what's your favorite, LGBTQIA plus movie? You have like 2 options, and one had a kind of happy ending, and then the other one just had nothing but death and pain. You're like,
suddenly Last Summer, where he goes over the cliff. Yeah,
exactly. So now that we have so much more representation, I feel like we want to shout about it even more. I can't even fathom what the next generation, of authors coming up or have to deal with when someone says, "What's your favorite book?" Best of luck to them.
Well, you actually get a real choice then, yes, as opposed to picking the one thing that's out there.
And then it is one that you don't really like, but I mean, what are my options?
You'll take it because you'll take anything. Exactly. Yeah, I was in Budapest like not long after they had like switched from communism to capitalism, and suddenly there was like more than one shoe store. And my friends who lived in Budapest were telling me, they were like, this is crazy. Like, we used to just go to the one shoe store and you would get the one kind of shoe. And now we have like this choice of shoes. And rather than finding that exciting and like, I can buy any shoe I want, they got paralyzed. My friend Becky got paralyzed because she couldn't choose a shoe because choice was absolutely problematic in that way.
Right.
And I feel like it's paralyzing. Like there's just so much we want to shout about and choose from now. Like representation, as crappy as that word is, representation, presence is so much better now.
Yes. It's not where we want it to be, but
better.
Definitely better.
But you know what? I'm old and tired. So now it's somebody else's turn. Like we got the thing, like we got the ball this far, now you take it and keep going. Like you get to start here and keep going. I'm not that old or that tired, frankly, but you know what I mean.
I do.
Jesse is secretly 78 years old. Julian is secretly 78 years old but doesn't want to tell anyone.
Not even close. Trust me, when I get there though, I have big plans.
Okay.
But enough about us though. Let's open the floor to Kate Elizabeth, because we will definitely go back and forth all night. Talk to us. So we can start talking.
I wanted to invite any of the attendees, if you have questions for Julian and Alysia, please put them in the chat and I will read them out to them. So I'll make sure I have my chat up. I had a question, which was to both of you, because in preparation for this, I reread The Summer of Everything and Luck Monkey. And it made me think about, do you think about how you're framing your story when you're writing for particularly young teens or young adults who might be struggling a little bit? Do you think about, is it better to have a happy ending, or is it better to be more realistic? I mean, how do you parse those things?
For me, it's first having to.
I'm sorry. I have to qualify. Not that a happy ending is not real.
Right. I do think, but it is a very valid thing that, like I said, is often portrayed, that, oh no, they wouldn't end up like this, and their family wouldn't be accepting of this, and all these other different things. And I think that's the first thing I have to do, is eliminate the impossible and make it possible when I'm writing, because that's the thinking that has been told and beat down into so many of us, is this is not realistic because you didn't have to earn your joy or earn your happiness or earn your your love or whatever it is. And when I'm writing, that's what I take out of my thought process, is no one should have to earn these things, because some people it's given to from birth. And some people get to move and navigate through this world freely without these concerns and without these worries. And that's how I want marginalized people to feel, like they don't have to earn it, and they have the freedom to move in ways that the people that surround them, the majority, are able to do. Because otherwise, then I'm not doing a service to the reader. Trying to live in the world. Someone said, I can't say it perfectly, but I try to write to the world that I expect, and the world that I, as an adult, should be creating for young readers, young adults, teens, children, or whatever it is. And that's how I think about it when I'm writing.
Like speculative fiction.
That should be nonfiction in like 5 years. That's what I'm hoping for.
We have a question in the chat. How would you have wanted a librarian to serve you when you were a young person? Was there something librarians could have done better when you were a young queer person?
I don't think I would have told a librarian I was a young queer person, frankly. But maybe if that librarian were visibly queer, I would have felt more comfortable doing that. The librarians in my town were definitely not. There was Miss Worth who wore the green turtleneck and reached down to get tissues out of the turtleneck. Red hair and bright red lipstick, and she was probably about 85. I mean, definitely not a queer ball. So I would have liked to see my librarian as a person, as a real person who knew people in the world and had feelings about things, and not just someone who loved the books, but someone who loved the world. The end.
I feel like librarians did me a lot of good, because I could go to them and tell them what I wanted to read in a way that made me still feel safe, and they provided it for me, versus when I was in class and Like I cannot express enough to people how much I hated The Great Gatsby, but I really, really did. So librarians were like okay, well, I'm sorry you had to suffer through this, but here's this kind of thing. The way I wish, for me, I know it's changed a lot, but the way I wish it would have changed is if librarians or teachers or whoever in my life didn't recommend me things based on the identities that I have that are visible, which is, don't hand me a book with the Black person on the cover just because you see my Blackness, kind of thing. I appreciate it, especially if it's a happy ending or a heroic story or whatever. That's great. But also, there's so many other aspects of me that are invisible that I want, it to be not that you should read this because the person on the cover is Black. But the same thing I would want for any other identity that's around me. I wouldn't want, librarians or teachers just hand books to, a white child and say, here, read this because this is you represented on the cover. Because that's not how we build empathy. That's not how we make anyone better. That's not how we understand the people that are around us better. And so that is the only one thing. But I do feel, as someone who's worked with librarians quite a bit now, I do know that it's changed. I just want it to be something that's continuously in people's mind. It's just because identity is visible does not mean that's what you should be putting in front of them to say, okay, well, this looks like it'll suit you. Because it may not.
You might also be misreading that visible identity.
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not good. Like we have plenty, my partner and I have plenty of friends who are visibly interpreted as African American, but are not. They're from the islands. They don't identify as African American. I mean, maybe if you go back like numerous generations, but they, we have friends who say like, I am not African American. Don't call me that. Even though in the common parlance, like now that's the thing you call. But it's the same thing. Like you can't tell by looking at someone, even if you think you know what their invisible, like what their visible identities are. You can't be sure. You don't know.
Right.
Stupid.
Katie, did you have any questions? I have a whole list here.
I was jotting down things as everybody was talking because I was doing a lot of this.
Right.
I'm just thinking again about the books that existed as we were growing up and how there was no representation at all. And now I think there are so many that are doing it that a lot of them are doing it poorly. And I mean, one of my personal pet peeves is those sort of like issues books. So it's like, oh, the gay coming out crisis, or, the Black kid moving to a white town, or like, I feel like those sort of things are so one-dimensional and just don't do anything for anybody really, so I'm interested in how those representations and those authentic stories and like all of those have evolved, because I think now that there's more, there's a lot that's better, but there's not always better. Do you know what I mean?
But that's, I feel like that's actually a win. I feel like when people are represented as people, there are crappy representations and there are great ones. When you get to be a human in people's minds, there are going to be some very bad representations and some very well done ones. I feel like absence is the problem. I can weed through the good and the bad, but I also think that's a stage. I think that's a stage, and I think that's also first we have nothing, then we have the stereotypes, then we have this sort of like cruddy version, then we get to the place where we get to be real people. Toni Morrison, who is an author that I just absolutely worship, who apparently used to live near me, which I always had fantasies of going and stalking her in the grocery store.
Oh,
but
no.
it didn't happen. She passed away before I got to her. Lucky her.
No.
She wrote this book of essays called Playing in the Dark, which is really great. I'm pretty sure this is in Playing in the Dark. Oh no, wait, it might be my favorite playwright. I'm just on a total tangent. It might be my favorite playwright, Susan Laurie Parks, who wrote a book of essays also. And one of the essays was called an essay, I think it was an essay for Black people on stage. The Black people on stage part is right. I don't remember what the first part was, but a something for Black people on stage. And one of the things she said is that white people historically have been allowed to be people. Black people, when they're represented, are representations. They are serving a purpose. They're Black to show X, Y, or Z. They're not allowed to be live and real and whole and flawed. And I feel like that's actually one of the stages of representation, is that we get represented, like a group gets represented, not as whole and not as real, but as this sort of like idealized version, right? Because there's still not enough representation to risk representing someone with real flaws. And that is a privilege of being in the majority, that you get to be represented as whole and not as a sort of like idealized version. But you have to get to that point where that representation occurs. So I think like that's where I come from on the flaw thing and on the problematic thing. Like I want to read bad representations, and I mean bad representations like poorly done ones, because, well, I don't want to read them, but I want them to be out there because I want to know the difference.
Yeah, I tried reading a book ages ago that was written by a much older man trying to write like a college freshman girl. And it was embarrassing.
Did he ask himself why it needed to be told through this?
I thoroughly believe that he did not, because he's a very well-known author that, you know, sells all this stuff, but like it was embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
It was like people.
That's that point of privilege.
Yeah. Not
to ask yourself, why am I doing this, is very much a point of privilege. Like it's your right to make that representation if you want. Everyone's available to you to represent.
Right.
You don't have to think about it or ask.
And just
I want to know who it was.
Oh
no. Who was it?
Wow. No naming and shaming.
Oh my God, I couldn't get it through it. It was like, but it's like the slang's maybe 10 years too old, or like people don't talk to each other like that. But, you know, so I think for people who are very well established as writers, like they'll just get away with it, you know? And I'm sitting here cringing, going, I can't do this, you know?
Going back to, you know, what you're saying though, I think it's a question of, I don't ever want it to be like we have too much, or we've had too much of these same kind of narratives, only because a lot of marginalized communities have not been able to tell their perspective of that experience, and that go to like coming out, like and the ways that our identities intersect. And, you know, the coming out narrative, yes, it's been done quite often, but who has it been done by, and who has it not been done by? The same thing with social justice books and like that. There are always going to be important stories to be told, and so there's never like enough done yet, I think, because we still haven't made space for everyone to tell the story. At the same time, I think it becomes a problem when a lot of people are just using that as the main plot point of this marginalized identity, and then that's it. We're not bringing anything original to the canon. We're just piling it on, and then it does become bad because it becomes so saturated with the same story, and people, when they try to put their own little spin on it, then it becomes harmful, and then it becomes just like so stereotyped. And I think that's issue. But like I don't want people to think that we've had enough, because we haven't. Like I think there's a lot of coming out stories that need to be told from other identities, or identities that intersect, that will definitely help other people along. But also at the same time, like I could deal without Ryan Murphy putting out another 6 queer shows and thinking I'm doing something original. No, I don't think you are. I'm sorry. I don't think you are. And I think you need to make space for other people from marginalized identities to tell this story, period.
That's an unpopular opinion there.
I listen and I get it.
I get it.
I know people love some Ryan Murphy. At the same time, I don't even know how many people are in this world now, but there are enough from different identities that we can let someone else in the door and let them tell this authentic story, so that people
You don't have to be the one speaking. Build the platform.
exactly, which is built
He's rich
now,
enough.
Ryan. Yeah, it's built. You can slide to the back of the room now. It's fine.
Yeah. Sit down. Ryan.
I have a question for Alysia. How did you come up with the idea for the uproots? I loved that part of Luck Monkey. I love that it was so interesting to me, and it was not anything I had ever heard of before or sort of conceptualized. I just thought that was so interesting. Where did you come up with that? Where did that come up?
So the uproots is this clandestine group that these kids have together, where they break into a home, they steal one possession, then they break into another home, put that one possession in that home, and steal one possession and go to the next one. So they're shifting everybody's possessions by one. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
How did I come up with the idea for that? I don't know.
No life experience there?
Maybe I was really drunk. I don't know. But I think part of it has its roots for me in being the age that I am. I read a lot of socialism and a lot of Marxism, and it has its roots in Marxism. The feeling that private property is problematic and it makes people behave in very problematic ways. And in my mind, Marxism is actually very connected to queer identities or queer politics. It's very connected to politics of POC. All of those, at the root of a lot of those things is thinking about the world in terms of private property and ownership. And so for me, it was about that. It was about I wanted a group that was making an intervention into ownership.
I loved that. I just thought that was such a great piece in that book.
Watch out, because Elizabeth lives near me, so you may be missing an armchair soon.
Can I pick what goes?
If a note, and if I'm feeling nice, yes. Nothing too heavy though.
Right. Well, this has been really, really great. I want to read you something that someone had to leave the conversation, but she said, I have loved this conversation and the authenticity that is so obvious in hearing your exchange. Thank you all for your time. So this has been really fun. I love listening to people talk about their work and their processes. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Anybody else have any questions before we leave? Let's just look on the. Sure.
I don't see any others. Okay. But
well, you guys were so generous with your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Fun.
I'll see you. I'll wave. Bye.
I'm one of these.
I know
I'll
you're
come
not
over
there.
and join.
I'm not home. You're waving at my friend Kelly. Bye.
Well, thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Have a wonderful night.